My name is David, and I was born into a family that built and owned a successful chain of luxury hotels across the country. My parents were seasoned entrepreneurs who founded Crescent Hotels, a name that had become synonymous with elegance and high-end hospitality. From a young age, my sister Lucy and I were surrounded by privilege, but our parents never allowed us to take it for granted. They made it clear if we ever hoped to take over the business, we had to earn our place not through entitlement, but through merit. I'm 3 years older than Lucy, and for as long as I can remember, I was considered the natural successor. I studied at one of Canada's top business schools, interned at Crescent's international branches, and by the time I was 24, I had been sent to Singapore to work directly under the executive director there. Everything seemed to be moving according to my plan. Lucy, on the other hand, was always different. She was more introverted, artistic, and emotionally sensitive. While I was attending finance seminars and boardroom meetings, Lucy was sketching designs, devouring architecture magazines, and dreaming of a career in design or the arts. I never thought she had any real interest in the business, and frankly, I didn't think she was cut out for it. That changed. After graduating from university, Lucy surprised everyone by applying to work at Crescent Hotels. She started in the product development division, and although I assumed she was just trying it out, she quickly proved herself. Her eye for design, her understanding of market trends, and her ability to connect emotionally with both clients and staff made her stand out. Within 2 years, she was promoted to lead our national brand strategy team. I didn't say anything at the time, but I felt a shift, subtle but undeniable. Despite that, our bond as siblings remained strong. We went on family vacations together, celebrated each other's successes, and often talked about what it might be like to run the company side by side. She would handle the creative side, I'd handle the operations. It felt like a perfect match. People in the company used to say, with David and Lucy together, Crescent Hotels will never fall. Looking back, it almost feels ironic now. If someone had told me that one day my own sister, the same girl I once taught how to ride a bike, who I defended in high school when she got bullied, would be the one to fire me, I would have laughed. Out loud. But life has a way of humbling you when you least expect it. At the time, I truly believed I was doing everything right. I had the experience, the numbers, the investor relationships, and a rock-solid commitment to the Crescent brand. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of something important. Maybe I got too comfortable. Maybe I assumed that loyalty and seniority were enough. Meanwhile, Lucy changed. She became sharper, more assertive, and more strategic than I ever gave her credit for. And when the opportunity came, she took it fully, unapologetically, even if it meant shattering the foundation of trust we'd built over a lifetime. By the time I turned 28, I was vice president of operations for Crescent Hotels, overseeing logistics expansion strategies and internal performance across our major properties. It was a role I had prepared for most of my life, and I took it seriously. I worked long hours, traveled constantly, and committed myself entirely to ensuring the company continued to grow. Our parents, now semi-retired, had entrusted Lucy and me with significant decision-making power. While they still sat on the board, it was clear they were grooming us to take full control. I assumed I was being prepared to eventually become president, and to be honest, I thought Lucy knew that too. It wasn't arrogance, it was the structure that had always existed. I was the older sibling. I had more experience. I had results to show for it. But things started to shift in subtle ways. Lucy, who was now the chief brand officer, began making bolder moves, pushing through major renovations, rebranding 3 of our downtown locations, and initiating partnerships with local artists and sustainable design firms. Her choices were unconventional, even risky, but surprisingly effective. Occupancy rates in those locations went up. Reviews were better. Guests loved the modern, locally inspired atmosphere she was curating. And she wasn't just creative, she was smart. She knew how to speak to the new generation of travelers. While I focused on profitability and operational efficiency, Lucy was building something else entirely: loyalty. Her ideas connected with people, not just spreadsheets. At first, I supported her. We had always presented a united front, and despite our different styles, I admired her passion. But as more and more executives began praising Lucy's vision, I started feeling like the air was shifting in the boardroom. People were looking at her differently, not just as the creative sibling, but as a potential leader. I tried to brush it off. I reminded myself that I had led our expansion into British Columbia, that I had streamlined our supply chain and saved the company millions. But still, something gnawed at me. A sense that the path I thought I was on was no longer guaranteed. Then came the Vancouver acquisition, a project that would test everything. We had the chance to purchase a boutique hotel in Vancouver's historic Gastown district. It was an ideal location, and I pushed hard for the acquisition. I did the financial modeling, led the negotiation, and presented it to the board. Lucy, however, had concerns. She felt the building lacked character, that it didn't align with the evolving Crescent brand. She wanted to wait for something more authentic. We clashed. For the first time, our disagreement became public. The boardroom was tense. I argued the numbers. She argued the brand. I accused her of being too idealistic. She called me out for being too narrow-minded. In the end, the board sided with Lucy. We didn't buy the property. At the time, I was furious. Not just because I lost the argument, but because it felt like Lucy had crossed some invisible line between us. It wasn't just business, it was personal now. After that, our working relationship changed. We still spoke, still coordinated decisions, but the warmth between us had faded. Meetings became shorter, emails more transactional. We no longer went for lunch after board sessions. She no longer asked for my input on brand projects. And I, out of pride or maybe insecurity, stopped offering it. But what truly blindsided me came only a few months later. Our parents called a private board meeting, just the five of us. I assumed it was a routine quarterly update. Instead, they announced they were stepping down completely and naming a new president to lead Crescent Hotels into its next era. They chose Lucy. Not me. Not both of us. Just her. The moment the words left our father's mouth, I felt like the ground shifted beneath me. I tried to stay composed, nodded, said the right things, but I was in shock. Lucy, on the other hand, was gracious, calm. She thanked them and looked over at me with a polite smile, but her eyes said something else. This is already done. I left that meeting in a daze. Drove around for hours without a destination. I kept replaying the last few months in my mind, every disagreement, every shift in tone, every moment I had ignored the signs. My little sister, the girl who once shadowed me during summer internships, had just taken the seat I thought was meant for me. And worse, I hadn't seen it coming. That day marked the beginning of the end. I didn't know it yet, but Lucy's appointment would do more than just bruise my ego. It would lead to a series of decisions that would eventually push me out of the very company I had spent my life helping to build. Still, at that moment, I believed we could make it work. She was my sister, after all. We'd find a way, right? Lucy's first few months as president were different. She moved fast, too fast, in my opinion. Department heads were shuffled. 2 regional managers I'd personally hired were let go. New faces appeared almost overnight, many of them people I didn't recognize. She held weekly vision alignment meetings, brought in a diversity consultant, and revamped our entire onboarding system. I'll admit some of her ideas made sense. She was clearly aiming to modernize Crescent Hotels, especially to attract younger travelers. But everything about the pace and the way she sidelined me rubbed me the wrong way. I wasn't just an executive anymore. I felt like an outsider. My responsibilities started to shrink. Projects I had overseen for years were quietly reassigned. I found myself excluded from key meetings, or worse, invited last minute, as if I were an afterthought. One afternoon, I walked into a strategy session with our Toronto team, only to find out Lucy had already presented an entire restructuring plan without consulting me. When I confronted her privately, she said, "David, you're not the only one who knows how this company works. We need fresh perspectives." Fresh perspectives. That one stung. It wasn't just about business anymore, it was about control. Lucy and I barely spoke outside of work now. We were cordial, polite, but something unspoken lingered between us, resentment. Mine was obvious. Hers was harder to read. Maybe it had been building all these years, buried under our so-called teamwork. But even then, I didn't expect what came next. It was a Wednesday, chilly gray skies over downtown Montreal. I had just returned from visiting our Ottawa property and came into the office a bit later than usual. My assistant looked nervous. "You're needed upstairs," she said, right away. I knew the tone. Something was off. When I stepped into the boardroom, Lucy was already seated. HR was present. Legal, too. That was when my stomach dropped. "David," she began, voice steady but cold. "I want to thank you for your years of service. Crescent Hotels wouldn't be what it is without your contribution. But, moving forward, we're heading in a different direction. Effective immediately, your position as VP of Operations is being dissolved." I stared at her, thinking this was a joke, or some elaborate power play. "You're firing me," I said slowly. "No," she replied. "I'm restructuring, and as a result, your role is no longer part of the new executive framework." Same difference. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own sister. The girl I used to walk to school. The one who used to borrow my sweaters and raid my playlist. She was sitting across from me like a stranger terminating me from the company we built together. "This isn't personal," she added, as if that made it better. "Yes, it is," I snapped. "You've been cutting me out for months. This was your plan all along." Lucy didn't flinch. "I didn't plan this, David. I had to make hard decisions ones our parents didn't have the courage to make. You've been holding on to an old version of this company, and it's time we evolve." I looked around the room at HR, at legal, and realized this was final. She dotted every I, crossed every T. I had no ground to stand on. I stood up, still trying to hold onto a shred of dignity. "You'll regret this." She didn't say anything, just gave me a small, infuriatingly calm nod. Walking out of that office felt like being pushed off a cliff. No severance negotiation, no farewell party, no thank you card. Just an exit package and a non-compete clause shoved into my hands. My office was cleared out within an hour. A security guard followed me to the elevator like I was some disgraced employee. The whispers started almost immediately. Some said I'd been too old school. Others believed Lucy had always wanted me out. A few reached out with sympathy, but not many. In corporate circles, association fades quickly when you're no longer in power. The hardest part, telling our parents. When I met with them later that week, I expected outrage, or at least disappointment. But all I got was a tired look from my dad and a strained sigh from my mum. "She's president now," he said. "You need to respect that." I almost laughed. "You built this company with me by your side. Don't you care she just threw me out like garbage?" "She's doing what she believes is best for the company," Mum added. "You and Lucy, you've always been different. Maybe it's time to find your own path." That's when it really hit me. I wasn't just out of a job. I was out of the family business, out of the legacy I'd devoted my entire adult life to. The next few weeks were a blur. I went from boardrooms and conference calls to long walks and unanswered emails. People stopped reaching out. Recruiters sent polite declines. For the first time in my life, I didn't know what came next. But I did know one thing. I wasn't done. Lucy might have taken Crescent Hotels from me, but she hadn't taken everything. I had knowledge. I had connections. And I had something even more powerful, a reason to fight back. If she wanted a war, she was about to get one. The first Monday after my dismissal hit me like a brick. No emails, no calls, no meetings, just silence. For 20 years, my life had revolved around Crescent Hotels. Early mornings, late nights, weekends sacrificed. Now I sat in my condo in Old Montreal, staring at a cold cup of coffee, wondering who I was without that title. I tried to distract myself. Cleaned out the storage closet, walked along the waterfront, cooked an elaborate dinner I had no appetite for. Nothing worked. Every hour reminded me of what I'd lost and who had taken it. Lucy. I kept replaying the moment in the boardroom. Her calm face, her measured tone, the way she delivered the news like she was reciting a script. That wasn't the sister I knew. That was a tactician, a stranger. By the end of the week I was restless. So I did what I always do when I need to think. I drove. Got in my car and headed east, no destination in mind. The autumn colors were just starting to turn, and the highway was lined with gold and crimson trees. Somewhere past Quebec City, I stopped at a small roadside inn, the kind of place we used to model Crescent after back in the early days. Quaint, independent, full of charm, but slightly behind the times. I checked in, had a glass of mediocre wine, and spent the evening chatting with the owner, a woman in her 60s named Claire. She'd been running the place for 30 years, mostly on her own. Told me about the time her roof collapsed in the middle of winter, or how she fought off a corporate chain that tried to buy her out. She reminded me of who I used to be: hungry, relentless, full of purpose. That night, lying awake in a creaky bed, I had a thought I hadn't dared entertain until then. What if I started over? Not just a new job, a new company. One that didn't follow the corporate template Lucy was enforcing. One that went back to what Crescent used to be before branding teams and investor decks took over. A boutique chain. Intimate, rooted in community, driven by experience, not metrics. A direct rival to Crescent. Not to destroy it, but to remind it of what it had forgotten. The idea stuck. When I got back to Montreal, I called an old friend, Travis Ung, a real estate developer I'd worked with years ago. We met at a cafe downtown, and after I laid it out for him, he leaned back, sipped his espresso, and said, "You're either completely mad or a genius. Either way, I'm in." That was the spark. Within a month, we'd set up an initial funding pool. Small, nothing close to Crescent's war chest, but enough to get started. I called in favors from architects, designers, and former colleagues who'd quietly reached out after my firing. Turns out I wasn't the only one disillusioned by Lucy's leadership. Some had been forced out. Others stayed but confessed they were walking on eggshells. One former regional manager told me Lucy ran things like a numbers machine with no warmth, no soul. That's not how you build hospitality. That's how you build a spreadsheet. I called the new venture Ridge and River, a name that felt grounded, local, and real. Our mission was simple, intimate spaces, thoughtful design, and truly personal service. No generic decor, no loyalty points. Just human connection, redefined for modern travelers. We began scouting properties in Nova Scotia, British Columbia, and even a charming historic inn outside Calgary. Each one had character, history, and potential. Not scalable yet, but that was the point. This wasn't about growth. It was about impact. And yet I'd be lying if I said this was only about vision. It was also about her. The day Lucy found out about me, about Ridge and River, I got a message. Just one line. "Starting your own chain? Really, David?" I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because deep down, I knew I'd struck a nerve. We may have taken different paths, but Lucy and I were still cut from the same cloth. Neither of us knew how to back down. And now we were competitors. The media caught on fast. "Sibling rivalry turns corporate," one article read. Another headline asked, "Can David Tran outshine his sister's empire?" I hated the attention, but I also knew it was working. People were watching. More than that, they were choosing. A former Crescent client reached out, interested in switching their executive retreats to our future Nova Scotia location. Another offered to invest. Suddenly, I had momentum. Real momentum. Still, the pressure was real. I had no corporate safety net. No board to back me. Everything was on the line, my savings, my name, my pride. Some nights I lay awake wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Other nights I dreamed of walking into Crescent's annual shareholder gala and shaking Lucy's hand as her rival. The wind off the Atlantic was sharp that morning, carrying the scent of salt and pine through the hills of Lunenburg. I stood outside our first Ridge and River property, a restored 19th century inn perched on a slope overlooking the harbor, watching the sun rise through the mist. My breath came out in clouds, but I barely noticed the cold. Today was opening day. It had taken 7 months of sleepless nights, phone calls at all hours, permit nightmares, design headaches, and budget fights, but we'd done it. Against all odds, we'd turned a forgotten property into something beautiful. Not flashy, not Instagrammable, just real. Inside, the fireplaces were lit. The cafe was stocked with fresh-baked goods from a local bakery. Our staff, only 12 of them, were dressed in simple uniforms we designed ourselves, soft gray shirts, warm flannel accents, and name tags with their hometowns underneath. This place had soul. You could feel it in the walls. By 10 a.m., the first guests arrived: 2 retired teachers from PEI, a young Toronto couple doing a road trip, and a solo travel blogger who'd written a glowing preview after touring during soft launch. Word had spread faster than I'd hoped. As the day unfolded, I watched them settle in. They asked questions. They lingered in the library. They complimented the handmade soaps and the blankets sewn by a nearby Mi'kmaq artisan collective we'd partnered with. No one rushed. No one complained. It felt right. But just as I started to breathe easier, she showed up. Lucy. I saw the SUV pull in just past 2 p.m. Sleek black and completely out of place against the wooden beams and hand-painted signage. She stepped out wearing a beige trench coat and a look of pure composure. Her assistant trailed behind, checking something on his phone. My stomach dropped. She didn't book. She didn't call. She just walked right up the front steps like she still owned the world. "Nice paint job," she said as she reached the porch. Though I would have chosen something more timeless than eggplant, I forced a smile. "It's not eggplant, it's heather plum, and it was locally sourced." She didn't laugh. We stood there for a second, silence stretching between us like a taut rope. Then she said, "You're making waves. That's the idea." She glanced toward the reception desk, where our front desk manager, Aisha, a former Crescent employee, was laughing with a guest. Lucy noticed her too. "Traitor," she muttered under her breath. "I didn't steal her," I replied. "She left when you made regional managers do frontline scheduling." Her jaw twitched. We sat in the lounge across from each other, each pretending this was just a friendly drop-in. She ordered a tea she wouldn't drink. I declined to ask about Crescent's latest quarterly numbers, even though I knew them by heart. Then came the real question. "Why David?" I looked at her, unsure if she wanted honesty or just another round of sibling performance. "Because I couldn't keep watching you turn something we built with heart into a machine. You forgot who we were. What Crescent used to stand for." She exhaled slowly. "What we used to stand for doesn't scale. Emotion doesn't impress shareholders." "And what about the guests?" I asked. "You remember them, right? The people who stay in those rooms, who trust us with their milestones and memories. You can't quantify that. Lucy's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. I couldn't tell if it was regret or rage. "You think this place threatens me?" she finally said. "No," I replied, voice steady. "But I think it's a reminder. One you don't want out there." She stood up, smoothed her coat. "Good luck, David. Really. But don't confuse charm with longevity. Sentiment fades, strategy wins." With that, she left. No dramatic exit. No tears. Just cool dismissal, the same tone she used in the boardroom the day she fired me. But her visit confirmed one thing: I was on her radar. That evening, as the sun dipped into the harbor and the lounge filled with soft music and the clinking of wine glasses, I felt something I hadn't in months: peace. We weren't massive, we weren't famous, but we were open. And that meant everything. Still, I wasn't naive. Lucy would retaliate. Whether through pricing wars, PR whispers, or trying to buy out any supplier we shared, I knew the game. And I was ready. The next morning, I met with Travis and Aisha. We mapped out potential expansion, slow and careful. One in Ontario's wine country, one near Whistler. We agreed to vet each partner personally and keep the soul intact, even if growth meant more pressure. Before heading back to Montreal, I took one last walk around the inn. It was quiet, peaceful. The kind of quiet I used to chase in boardrooms, but never found. I paused by the front door where an old photograph hung. It was the original building, 1893, with the first owners standing in front, arms crossed, proud and tired. That was how I felt now. Proud, tired, but still standing. And for the first time since Lucy took that chair, I knew exactly where I belonged.